What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Ben on Sports. NASCAR Week 23 already, season flying by. This weekend, NASCAR is heading to Indianapolis. Let's get into it. Coming off of a Dover week, Denny Hamlin finally gets back on an oval and picks up his fourth victory of the season, breaking a tie, and he is now leading the series in wins. Despite the fact that race was kind of dominated by JGR and Hendrick Motorsports, it was, thankfully there was that late caution and it made it a little bit interesting down the end, but there was really only three or four cars from two organizations that were ever going to win that race. Not only did Denny Hamlin get the win, Denny Hamlin was on top. Chase Elliott is also on top. And what should be the first time of the entire season, we have a new regular season points leader, Chase Elliott, getting by his Hendrick Motorsports teammate to get first place in the regular season championship. Chase Elliott on a hot streak. He's just putting together good finish after good finish, and now I think he has a race winning speed instead of 10th place speed, and it is showing. Obviously could have won that race, picked up a stage win. Chase Elliott looking pretty darn quick and now leading the regular season points. First time all year at somebody other than William Byron. You heard me just kind of hint at it. Joe Gibbs Racing and Hendrick dominated Dover. There was a point where all 8 cars were first through 8, right? Each team has 4 cars. They all almost had good finishes. It felt like everybody but Christopher Bell, who after his second spin of the race went to the back, but Christopher Bell was obviously fast, led laps, and had a chance to win that race before he spun for the second time. A week, as it usually does at Dover, where the big dogs are out front dominating, and certainly could be the case this weekend. And which is why I'm posing the question, is it about to happen again? Indianapolis, it's not an easy track. You need some good drivers. You need good equipment. It's very, very unique. Maybe there's one similar track, but and even that's kind of iffy. 2.5 mile oval, very narrow track, right? I think there might be a couple other cars, but I still think you're going to see a lot of the big dogs on top this weekend. Speaking of Indianapolis, we have a Crown Jewel race, our third Crown Jewel race of the year. Obviously, the Daytona 500 and the Coca-Cola 600 have already happened. This weekend, it is the Brickyard 400. I'm so happy NASCAR's not doing the road course and it's back to being a Crown Jewel event. Looking at the guys who need to win this to complete their Crown Jewel hopes, Denny Hamlin is the only one that can complete his Crown Jewel with a win this weekend. He's going to be one of the favorites. There's some guys who have other ones but don't have the Indy 500 that can get them closer. People like Chase Briscoe, Austin Dillon, William Byron, Austin Cindric. All of those guys have one or two of the other Crown Jewels, and Indy would help them get closer but not complete it. And then you have a lot of drivers that have 3 Crown Jewel events, but they already have the Indy 500, like Kyle Larson, like Kyle Busch, like Brad Keselowski. And you know what the funny thing is? All of those guys are all looking for the Daytona 500, something Denny Hamlin has 3 of. And again, Denny Hamlin is the only driver that can complete the career Crown Jewel, similar to completing the career Grand Slam in tennis, if you are a tennis fan. Only one that can do it this weekend. In-season tournament update. It's Ty versus Ty for the $1 million. Ty Dillon versus Ty Gibbs. Colleague Racing versus Joe Gibbs Racing. Chevy versus Toyota. And it absolutely the 2 drivers everybody thought it was going to be. Not actually. Ty Gibbs at least is part of one of the 2 best racing teams, even if he's been the worst driver this year for him. But Ty Gibbs, there was 32 teams that made it. Or Ty Dillon. And Ty Dillon was the 32nd seed. Does the flipper still fit? The slipper still fit? Will it fit one more time in Indianapolis? I don't know. I think this is a track where the fast teams are going to dominate, and Ty Gibbs is going to come to the track, I think, with a lot better car and a lot better equipment than Ty Dillon is. I think the Cinderella story is officially over. That being said, all it takes is one wreck to flip everything upside down. And arguably the biggest news this year in NASCAR's going to San Diego. Obviously, the news also came out that they're not going back to Chicago this year. But I think the biggest news, they're going to San Diego, not just anywhere in San Diego. They're going to Coronado, the U.S. Navy base, one of the most important U.S. military installations in the mainland. You know, if you're a big military guy or you're interested in different Navy things, Navy SEALs are trained at Coronado. It's a big thing down there on the beach. There has been other events held there before. I thought it was a pretty cool promo video that NASCAR put out with their drivers at Coronado. Looks like it could be a really unique, exciting event. Rumors had been circulating. NASCAR officially announces it. And Father's Day weekend, it appears. If you're not doing anything and you're a big NASCAR fan, it's going to be a very unique event. Something you don't see a lot of in NASCAR. Maybe you should think about heading down to Coronado and seeing NASCAR race on a military base. Certainly interesting cross promotion. Let's get into the history at Indianapolis and Pocono. Now, here's why. Let me explain what I'm doing with this. In the next gen, there has only been one race on the Indy Oval, and that was last July. For those of you who don't remember or didn't hear me say it earlier, for the last couple years until last year, the few years, I think it was 2 or 3, they were racing on the Indianapolis road course, not the oval. They're not racing on the road course anymore. They're back to the oval, which means oval prowess is going to be important. And there's not a whole lot. So there's only 1 year. I'm not going to give you just 1 year of data. I can tell you Kyle Larson won that race, and there was what I would argue a couple of surprising names in the top 10. There was also a big wreck late. But why did I put Pocono? You may be asking. Well, remember how I said Indianapolis is very unique and there's maybe one track that's similar-ish? I would say Pocono is the most similar track. Now, I know, it's a triangle, but hear me out. Pocono and Indy are both 2.5 mile intermediate courses, meaning there's only 2 tracks longer than Indianapolis Pocono, and they are both super speedways. Normally, when you see 2.5 miles, you think super speedways. They are not super speedways. They are intermediate courses. Okay. I would argue both of them are pretty narrow. Indianapolis more narrow than Pocono. They both have interesting turns where you need to be able to get down into the turn, get the grip down, and get going so you can make up ground on the straightaway. And the straightaways are pretty high speed because it is a 2.5 mile track. I would also say maybe Miami has a little bit of similarity to the Indy Oval. But I think Pocono, if anything, if you're going to say this track is the most similar, that Pocono is it. And it made me really happy when, after I had done research into this, because there's some debate, I had heard multiple NASCAR drivers come out and say Pocono is probably the most similar thing to the Indy Oval. So there you have it. So with that new knowledge, I'm going to put them together because there has been 5 total races in the next gen between those 2 tracks, and we're going to look at those stats together rather than just looking at one race where there was a wreck that took out some of the fastest cars. Obviously, at Pocono in 2022, Chase Elliott won, but that was the race where Chase Elliott finished 3rd, and then Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin finished 1st and 2nd, and they got disqualified because of their cars. So Chase Elliott won. Denny Hamlin won Pocono in 2023. Blaney won it in 2024. Last year's Indianapolis race, Kyle Larson won. And then we all remembered what happened just a month ago in June when Chase Briscoe won at Pocono. One more thing I want to add. And speaking of that Chase Briscoe victory, Indianapolis and Pocono are both known to have fuel mileage race finishes. And if you don't know what that means, it means there's going to be some people stretching it out on fuel, and fuel mileage becomes very, very important because they're so big, and the laps guys try to stretch fuel that you may not see at all the other tracks. So that is the other way in which they are similar, which is how arguably how Chase Briscoe won at Pocono in June. Best average finishes on these tracks. Chase Elliott with 7, with an average finish of 7th. Christopher Bell, 8.6. Tyler Reddick, 8.8. Kyle Larson, 9.2. Brad Keselowski, 13.4. So 4 drivers average a top 10. 2 of them are Hendrick. 1 of them is JGR. And 1 of them is 23XI, which obviously has that very close alliance with JGR. And you can see Martin Truex Jr., who raced here last year and had a decent race. Martin Truex Jr., I keep bringing him up. It's because this is his first non-full year, so he has a lot of stats in the next-gen car. Obviously, Chase Briscoe taking over for him. But Martin Truex would actually have the 5th best finish ahead of Brad Keselowski at 11.3. But again, he is retired. Most top 5s. 3 drivers tied at 3. Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, Denny Hamlin. 3 drivers tied at 2. Chase Elliott, Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson. Those 6 names with the most top 5s are 6 of the top 7 or 8 drivers on speed year in and year out, and are all part of the best teams in NASCAR. No shocker to see it. Most top 10s. Chase Elliott has got a top 10 finish every single one of these races in the next gen. Tyler Reddick is 2nd with 4. And third, there are 6 drivers tied at 6. And again, it's a lot of big names. Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, Martin Truex Jr., Ryan Blaney, Bubba Wallace, and Denny Hamlin. So again, just like last week, it very well could be a week where the big names, the big teams, the big guns take over. And that should not be 6 tied at 6. It should be 6 tied at 3. They all have 3 top 10s. Favorites to win Indianapolis. You've been hearing me talk about the big guns all episode. Hendrick Motorsports and Joe Gibbs, 1-2. Team Penske, because Ryan Blaney has done well here and at these type of tracks. Joey Logano was a vet. He might find some speed. Cindric had a good run here last year. So I went ahead and put Team Penske 3rd. 23XI, Tyler Reddick and Bubba have both been good at these types of tracks. And Tyler Reddick was fast here last year. And then I threw Trackhouse. There's not really a good 5th option, guys. I'm going to be honest. I think it's those top 4. And then Trackhouse, because Ross Chastain is Ross Chastain. Daniel Suarez had a good run here last year. But I don't love them. RFK could very, very well be the 5th team to watch. But I think it's really those top 4 when you're talking about favorites to win and have a good day. Driver rankings. Denny Hamlin, my favorite to win this weekend. And finally finish off his career crown jewel. Get race win. What would it be? Number 59? And complete his crown jewels. That would be a pretty special weekend for Denny Hamlin. Chase Elliott, one of the hottest drivers in NASCAR right now. Could have won last week. He's now 1st in the regular season point standings. It's a tight race, as we're going to find out later. But Chase Elliott seems like he's finding more and more speed. He's good on these type of tracks. Look out for Chase Elliott. Kyle Larson, in the only next-gen race at the Indy Oval, won. He had a good week last week, finally getting some momentum and breaking up that cold stretch. I think Kyle Larson is about to put together a couple of good weekends in a row. Tyler Reddick was just okay last week. I think he had a top 10 car and the strategy didn't work out. 23XI needs to find some speed. I still think Tyler Reddick is going to have it this weekend. And obviously last year they bought a fast car. I expect them to be fast this week. Christopher Bell is fast almost week in and week out. He's just an uber talented driver. JGR always has fast cars. And at a track where it pays to have good equipment, I don't see how Christopher Bell isn't one of the favorites. Ryan Blaney, he's been fast at Pocono. He was fast last year at Indy. He's fast, one of the guys who brings speed week in and week out. One of the teams, doesn't matter if it's a super speedway, a road course, a small track, an intermediate track, that team and that driver always seems to have speed and in contention for a top 10 as long as their engines aren't blowing up. And for that reason, I'm going to have Ryan Blaney 6. Byron didn't have a great finish last year. Wasn't entirely his fault. If you can remember back to a year ago, William Byron has been the regular season points leader every week this season until now. Little bit of a cold stretch, had a good weekend at Dover last week. William Byron, I'm sure Hendrick Motorsports is bringing speed, and I'm sure William Byron wants that regular season championship spot back. Bubba Wallace, another guy who's fast on these type of tracks, has good finishes at Pocono, was decent at Indy last year. 23 XI had speed last year. Bubba finally had a good week. I think Bubba's going to keep building momentum. Chase Briscoe, biggest wild card in this top 10. He finished, in the 20s last year at this track, but he was in inferior equipment last year. He has back-to-back second-place finishes. He has the most poles in NASCAR this year. The last 2 weeks, our places Martin Truex Jr. was fast at. And he found the way to have his best career finishes at Dover and Sonoma. That's been happening more and more frequently, I think, as him and James Smalls figure it out. Martin Truex Jr. was fast at Indy, just like he was fast at Pocono when Chase Briscoe hadn't showed a lot of speed. Well, Briscoe won Pocono. Not only that, we haven't had an Indiana native win at Indianapolis in a long time. Chase Briscoe looks like he's been looking forward to this race for a long time, almost all season. Listen, if Chase Briscoe one of the hottest drivers, obviously, as I said, back-to-back second-place finishes, if that 19 team keeps bringing speed, maybe the Indiana native breaks a long Indiana winless streak at the Indianapolis. And then Ty Gibbs, he's quietly on a hot streak, quietly putting together a lot of good points days. And maybe some of that's because of road courses and he's a great road racer. But he's having speed on the ovals too. He's been fast at Pocono in his career. And again, JGR is bringing speed. Look out for Ty Gibbs this weekend. Not only that, he has motivation to go fast. Even if he isn't getting the direct $1 million, which is stupid, in my opinion, the owners are getting it. I think the drivers deserve it, or at least split it among the team, right? But that's an argument for another time. But Ty Gibbs has motivation trying to win the $1 million and the in-season tournament. Look out for Ty Gibbs this weekend. Regular season standings. As I said, Chase Elliott becomes the first driver to 700 points and takes the lead away from William Byron. He was 13 points out coming in and outpointed William Byron and now has a 16-point lead, which is kind of crazy when you think about it because it's not like William Byron was all that slow. Kyle Larson is now up to third with 664. He's been in third. He's only 38 points back at Chase Elliott. Kyle Larson collecting stage points and getting a good finish. Denny Hamlin now up to fourth, 1 point back at Kyle Larson. One more good weekend. Denny Hamlin and Kyle Larson are both right back in it. And both of them could have good weeks this weekend. The top four drivers are separated by just 39 points. That is crazy tight up top. Tyler Reddick moves into fifth after Christopher Bell had his spinning issues at Dover. Reddick with 640. Christopher Bell was 635. And they are 62 and 67 points back at Chase Elliott, which maybe you can make up, but probably not. But they have to feel comfortable about finishing in that 4 to 6 range. It seems like they might be battling it out for 5th and 6th, though. Ryan Blaney didn't have a bad week, but he still is slipping points to Chase Briscoe behind him. Blaney was kind of in this top 7 battle for first, and now he's kind of faded. 576 points is good for 126 points back. And then Chase Briscoe in 8th has 570. Just 6 points back on Ryan Blaney. And now Chase Briscoe and Ryan Blaney, where, Chase Briscoe didn't think 7th in points maybe was possible. Now all of a sudden it is. Chase Briscoe right on the heels of Ryan Blaney. I still think Ryan Blaney's probably the favorite, but if Briscoe stays hot, maybe Briscoe can pick up an extra playoff point for finishing better in the regular season standings. Alex Bowman all the way up to 9th after a phenomenal week. One of the best cars this weekend, one of the best drivers. 547 points, 155 back of the leader, 23 back of Chase Briscoe. In 8th, Chris Buescher trying to still, just like Alex Bowman, both of those guys are trying to point their way into the playoffs. Buescher is at 528, which is 19 behind Bowman, 174 back of the leader. Logano, 4 back of Buescher. Ross Chastain, 7 back of Logano. So those guys, that 10, 11, 12, all three of those are guys are trying to make the playoffs. But that 10, 11, 12, remember, 10th place is that last place in regular season that will get a playoff point, and it's a tight race with those guys only being separated by 11. There is great points battles all up and down the regular season standings, and every single week will continue to be more and more important as there's not a lot of time to make up for a bad week if you have one. Bubba Wallace right now is in the playoffs in the transfer spot on points with 500 points on the dot. While it's 202 back of first place, he's in the playoffs and actually gained points to the good, as you'll see later on. Ryan Preece lost ground to Bubba Wallace. He's 16 points back with 484. Kyle Busch making up some ground, not a lot. He is at 461. Ty Gibbs is all of a sudden top 16 in points with 448 after being way back just 4 to 6 weeks ago. McDowell is in 17th. He's making not quite as fast as Ty Gibbs, but making a charge into the top 20. He has 423, and then this is just where things get crazy close. McDowell is in 17th with 443. AJ Allmendinger is in 18th with 420. Cindric, who thankfully for him has won his way into the playoffs, is in 19th with 417, and Eric Jones is in 20th with 411. 17th through 20th are separated by 12 points. That's crazy tight. However, none of those guys are really even close to pointing their way in to the playoffs, because right now Bubba Wallace is the cutoff, and there's Ryan Preece, Kyle Busch, Ty Gibbs, and then that really tight battle. But imagine if that tight battle was for a playoff spot. It'd be absolutely electric coming down the stretch. And speaking about the current playoff standings, we have a new leader in playoff points. This is not calculating in the point standings as they sit, because obviously right now Chase Elliott would be getting the most points for regular season standings. But I digress. Denny Hamlin is on top of the current playoff point standings with 24 playoff points after winning at Dover this weekend, one more than Kyle Larson's 23. Christopher Bell picked up a stage win, putting him in a tie for third with Shane Van Gisbergen. William Byron still is in fifth. Blaney still is in sixth. Cindric still is in seventh. Joey Logano is in eighth with 7. And then the 9, 10, 11, and 12, the race winners this year, Chase Elliott, Chase Briscoe, Ross Chastain, and Josh Berry all have 6 for 1 race win and 1 stage win. Elliott joining that crowd this weekend with his stage win at Dover. Tyler Reddick has 1 playoff point, and he is currently in the playoffs by 156 points. That is a really, really comfortable cushion as long as NASCAR doesn't get a whole bunch of new winners. 156. I mean, he's 5th in the regular season points. It'd be pretty crazy if he didn't make the playoffs. Alex Bowman, after a great weekend, has even more cushion, plus 63 to the cutoff line. Chris Buescher gained a couple points to the cutoff line with a plus 44. He still has negative 4 playoff points due to some penalties early in the year. Bubba Wallace went from a plus 3 to plus 16, gaining 13 points on Ryan Preece. And Bubba has 2 playoff points in the bank as well. Ryan Preece, as we've been saying, that battle for feels like a month has been between Bubba Wallace and Ryan Preece to see who can point their way in, assuming there's no new winners, which is a big assumption with tracks like Watkins Glen and Daytona left. But right now, Ryan Preece and Bubba Wallace still close enough where either one of them can win it or lose it on points with 1 race. Kyle Busch, I think, is 2 races out and 2 races and some help out. 39 points back of Bubba. Ty Gibbs is 52 points back, and McDowell is 20th in the current playoff standings at minus 77. In all reality, I think Preece and Busch, maybe Gibbs has a chance, but I think if you're 20th and back, you do not have any chance of pointing your way in, and you're going to need to get a win. Here are my driver power rankings, and I have some new colors this week. Green means the same thing that it has meant, that dark green that 7 of the top 8 have. Just to remind you guys, that dark green is the 7 guys that I believe are championship contenders and will have speed to finish in the top 10 every week. Those are your top 7 drivers. I think overall, even if I don't have them top 7, because I think Chase Briscoe right now is hotter than Ryan Blaney is and deserves to be ahead of him. Those drivers in yellow are drivers that I think should be in the playoffs every year, are playoff caliber drivers. I don't know if they can make a championship run, but they are good. They're right behind that green tier. That green tier is like tier 1A. That yellow tier is tier 1B, maybe even tier 2. Joey Logano is always blue because he's either finishing last or winning a race. Joey Logano has proven multiple times in this playoff format that he cannot have a lot of speed, not look good for most of the year, and then get hot in the playoffs and just win, right? It doesn't matter where he is on points. Joey Logano is always a threat to win a championship, and he's already won a race to make sure he is in the playoffs. These orange guys are guys that have not won a race. Orange is the new color. These orange guys are guys that have not won a race, but I think can reasonably point their way in if they do not win, or if nobody else wins. Because if somebody else wins, then it gets really dire for those three guys in orange. But if we have no new winners, I think those three guys can all point their way in, and they're kind of playoff fringe candidates. Michael McDowell, he deserves to be in the top 20 of the power rankings, in my opinion. But I don't think he can point his way in anymore. He is in a win-to-get-in situation with the way the points are and how many guys he would have to leapfrog on points and how many points back he actually is. Somebody that needs a win to make the playoffs but is currently driving well. And 18, 19, and 20, Cindric, Josh Berry, and Shane Van Gisbergen are guys that have won their way into the playoffs and are already in the playoffs, but people who I think are probably going out first round and really aren't threats to win the championship. They're just there to make the playoffs because they've won races. So as you can see, Chase Elliott still number 1. Denny Hamlin is up to number 2 in my power rankings. I think I kind of have a little gap with them right now. I have Larson, Byron, Bell all together. If Chase Briscoe has another good week, especially if Tyler Reddick doesn't have a good one, I could see moving Chase Briscoe up to 6. Again, Chase Briscoe, one of the hottest drivers, and Tyler Reddick, way more points than Briscoe, but 23XI needs to find some more speed, and I think Bubba wants to do that too. Blaney is bringing speed and having okay weeks, so he's still 8, and I still think Blaney is a championship contender. Bowman and Busch are good weeks. We talked about this, but those are my tiers. And again, if you ask why is Shane Van Gisbergen number 20, he had an awful week. Well, he did win 2 races in a row before this week, and he was at number 11, and he does have 3 race wins, which is tied for second most in the series, but he had an awful week, didn't do anything to quiet the rumors about him not being an oval guy, even if it was mechanical issues. So he's going to be number 20, and he is in extreme danger of dropping off. And the only other one that I think people might have a disagreement with, I have Ty Gibbs over Ryan Preece, because while Ryan Preece is ahead in the point standings, Ty Gibbs is making up a lot of ground over Ryan Preece and a little bit of ground over Bubba Wallace, and Ty Gibbs is just super hot right now. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your days, weeks, and lives for listening. It means a lot. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Follow me on X. Don't be afraid to @ me and ask questions on X or ask for takes. Please comment below who you think is going to win this week. Comment below who you think should be number 1 in the power rankings. Anything like that. If there's any disagreement that you want to voice, or any agreement, I really like agreement. But if there's any disagreement or agreement you want to voice, put it in the comments below. Take some time out of your weekend to find a couch and watch some sports, even if there isn't a lot on. Maybe you haven't watched a lot of NASCAR. Tune in this weekend. It's a crown jewel event, the Brickyard 400 at Indianapolis. Everybody, stay safe out there. Take care of yourself.